What's the most disturbing thing you have personally seen? I saw an older man get punched, and he hit his head on the concrete. That was the last time he was ever conscious. I had to testify at the murder trial. Watching my daughter's brain get taken over by cancer and slowly losing her life nearly destroyed me. Trying to explain to my grandchildren why their mommy is gone and where she went was equally painful. Reply: brain cancer is the worst thing I've ever witnessed. But I'm also a mother, and I can't imagine losing my son. So I can't even begin to understand the depth of your pain. I'm so incredibly sorry. Right now, as I'm typing this, I'm watching my father die from aggressive glioblastoma, and I wouldn't wish this kind of death on my worst enemy. My father was only diagnosed 6 weeks ago, and we're now in his final days. I hope your daughter didn't suffer for a long time. I'm sending you so much love for your daughter's children and for yourself. 3 of my friends broken and bloody from an accident that could have 100% been avoided. One had his foot ripped off, and the only thing that was holding it on was a small piece of boot leather. One had a broken back, and the driver had a concussion and a few other injuries. All 3 were medically retired. I have found 2 of them, and I'm still looking for the 3rd. I left my small hotel in Nairobi to go to a street market for some fruit. I was thinking about something from earlier and looking at the ground. I turned a corner and saw this strange, pinkish-gray chunk of brain. I looked up, and 8 to 10 meters ahead of me, a truck was stopped with a boy's body lying on the ground. The fact that only a couple of people were standing around showed that this had just happened. Like seconds before, people were gathering quickly by the second. My Swahili is very poor, but for what I understood, the boy had tripped right in front of the truck's back tires, and it had rolled over his skull. The pressure had scattered the contents all over the street. By the time I became a teenager, my dad was severely physically disabled. One day, my dad accidentally soiled himself and started crying with rage about it. His sense of helplessness, despair, anger, and self-hatred in that moment was the most horrible thing I've ever witnessed, and I've had nearly 40 years of experiences since then that could have topped it, but nothing has. Suicide attempt. A woman jumped off a 6th-floor balcony and landed on a fence. There was a drop-off beyond the fence, but she clearly didn't jump far enough to clear it. It happened early in the morning, and after a neighbor identified her, we went to wake up her husband in the apartment. The forensics team came and confirmed there were no signs of foul play. Watching the husband break down and cry was heartbreaking. Reply: you said suicide attempt, meaning she actually survived the jump? Editor's reply: I don't know for sure. She was still alive when we arrived at the scene. Her body was severely injured from the fall, and I was in law enforcement, so I didn't have the proper medical equipment to help her. Most of the time, when there's a fall, unless the person shows no signs of breathing or has deep cuts that need immediate attention, we're told to wait for the EMTs to arrive. All we can do is stabilize the neck and try to keep them awake. I don't really remember that part of what happened. I remember a lot of screaming, and her ribs looked out of place. Her forearm had also broken. As soon as the medical team arrived, we stepped back and started talking to the witnesses who had called 911. When we were younger, my cousin and I visited his dad in Oklahoma, who was remarried with another kid. Me and my cousin were looking for his stepbrother one day and couldn't find him anywhere. His dad owned a rather large plot of land with a lot of places for a young boy to adventure off to, so it wasn't uncommon to go missing for a few hours. While searching for him, we saw a small plume of smoke over by a small pond. We walked over to see him standing over a tortoise he had set on fire. He was staring at it, laughing as it struggled to get away. We were probably around 6 or 7. My daughter died by suicide nearly 3 years ago. Only God knows what was going through her mind. She called 911 to tell them where to find her body so that we wouldn't have to discover her ourselves. I'm forever grateful to the police, EMTs, and everyone who responded. Reply: I experienced this exact same situation with my dad, who hanged himself in a forest. My brother-in-law was the one who found him, and I still feel guilty that it wasn't me who found him instead. I had spent about 8 hours the night before searching for him, but couldn't locate him. I got a call about a single car accident at 4 in the morning. This was the first call I had responded to for the community volunteer fire department. I arrive on scene and find a car flipped over in the ditch with the driver dead in the front seat. I notice a car seat in the back, but I don't see a child or any other sign that one was there. 5 minutes later, I'm blocking off the road. Other people from the department are arriving on scene, and I hear someone come out of the bushes next to the road right beside me. A child no older than 5 or 6. She asked if we could be quiet because her mother was sleeping. I was absolutely devastated. I resigned not long after that. Reply: police and fire are 2 jobs that often encounter extremely disturbing situations. It takes a special person to do either one. If that was your first call, I don't blame you for leaving. That poor child. I watched a ski rescue team inform a mother that they had found her teenage daughter and that she had died. It was late at night after they had been searching for her for hours. The mom let out a horrific scream and collapsed to her knees. This happened at MT Hood Ski Bowl in early 2012. A 3-year-old who had been kept in a cage his entire life. He looked and behaved like a newborn, and the back of his head was completely flat from the extreme neglect. First day as an EMT, literally 20 minutes into the job at a small volunteer service. We get called to stage at a scene. A man with a shotgun had just walked up to the local hotel. He shot himself in the head 3 minutes later. We arrive, and I have to go confirm he has no pulse, since skipping that step is how people end up at the morgue still alive. The boss gave me the option to pass since I've been on the job for all of 0 days, but I said no. So I walk up and move half his jaw out of the way. It was split right down the middle along with most of his face. He had put the gun under his chin, and he hiccuped. What actually happened is called an agonal respiration. It's a last-ditch reflex your body has to try to keep you alive. Basically a biological Hail Mary. I jumped out of my skin, slipped in a pool of blood, and ended up getting a completely new uniform 2 hours after getting my first one. And now I hear that hiccup sound anytime something startles me. But I'm still working in EMS, so it just blends into all the other bad memories. When I was young and broke, I didn't have enough money to get home after work, and my truck ran out of gas on a busy freeway. It was near a high overpass, and I managed to coast my truck down the off-ramp and park near a gas station at the bottom. While I was on the phone calling a friend for help, I heard tires screeching. I turned to look just as 2 cars going about 60 miles per hour collided head-on. There was a thunderous boom from the overpass where the cars hit, and one car flew high in the air, trailing debris, flipped over midair, and dropped straight down, maybe 50 feet onto the road below the overpass. The car landed on its hood, and the roof was completely crushed. I was still at the scene when the fire truck arrived. Firemen ran over to the car with the jaws of life, stopped when they saw the car up close, then slowly walked back to their fire truck to get a tarp and covered the car with it. They didn't even try to pry it open. I witnessed my 34-year-old brother-in-law die of cirrhosis last summer. He drank a liter of Fireball every single day for 8 months. By the end, he was extremely thin. He was a deep dark yellow all over, and his belly was swollen like he was 9 months pregnant. The day he died, he was gasping and gurgling with blood in his mouth and on his lips, and his eyes were rolled back. My sister and I stood by his bedside. By that time, he had been transferred to palliative care/hospice. No tubes or wires, no monitors, nothing. We stood there holding his hand, and then it all just stopped. We looked at each other like, did he just... No more gasping or gurgling. Just silence. I'm glad he's at peace now, but the way he died was horrific, and so very, very young. I wouldn't wish any of it on anyone. My father, when he was in a narcissistic rage at me. I'll never forget his eyes going pitch black as he was in my face screaming at me because he had just been playing when he pressed what I thought was a loaded gun to my forehead and pulled the trigger. The reason he was lashing out at me was that I got so terrified that I started crying and begging for mercy. I was 5 years old when that game started, and every time was just as terrifying. My dad, in the final stages of dementia, wandering around the dance floor at my sister's wedding, getting angry with people because no one would tell him what time the helicopter back to Malta was leaving. He had regressed back to when he was stationed there with the Army and was completely convinced he would be getting picked up at 1800. I took him home shortly after this, and he got increasingly angry in the car until, sitting at a traffic light, his entire demeanor changed, and he turned to me and asked Ian, "What's wrong with me?" That was the last time he ever called me by my name. Guy getting run over by a big truck and seeing the paste-like red tracks smeared all over the road. A drug addict with arms covered in puncture marks, looking like a skeleton with skin stretched over it, offering me, a complete stranger, his services in exchange for small change. When I refused, the guy pulled out a kitchen knife from his back pocket. All of this happened during my late teen years in the middle of the day. I'm a medical student, and I feel like Cadaver Lab is a truly horrible experience. You have to actively disconnect yourself in order to not think about the fact that you're peeling off someone's skin, pulling their organs out, cutting their heart open, etc. The worst was around Halloween when we were learning about the face. They used a bone saw to slice the cadaver skulls in half down to the throat and open their heads up like a book so we could see the internal structures, nose, sinuses. For a mental picture, they kind of looked like the clickers from The Last of Us. It was horrific. There are so many other disturbing things, especially as it got later in the year, and we had dissected almost everything. I saw an eye that collapsed because we had to remove the eyelids, and it just kind of dried up. One of the bodies turned green, like Gumby green. I had nightmares. Once anatomy was over, I never set foot in that lab again. When I was 19, I saw a pickup truck flip over on the highway, blew a back tire on a hot day, absolutely tumbling off the road with a man ejected through the windshield. I got out as some other people pulled over in their cars as well to try and help. The people who got out near the man had these horrible looks on their faces and immediately turned away, didn't even check for a pulse. I was by the truck, and there was a girl hanging in this upside-down truck, and she suddenly regained consciousness. She came to so suddenly and just started screaming "Dad" over and over and over again in confusion. It was then I realized I had forgotten that it was Father's Day. Just a daughter and her dad out for an afternoon drive together, and he hadn't been wearing his seatbelt. Also, she was in the driver's seat and looked 17 at most. I called my dad after the paramedics arrived, absolutely sobbing. I still think about that day at least once a week, if not more, over 15 years later. I hope that girl has found some peace and doesn't blame herself anymore. When I was 10 years old, my friend Eric and I were riding around our Flint neighborhood. Someone ran a red light, so this one guy had to slam on his brakes. The lady behind him wasn't as quick and crashed into the back of his car. She wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and she flew forward, and her head went through the windshield. She was screaming as blood just poured out of her neck down the windshield, eventually dripping onto the ground behind the tire. Then she stopped screaming. I was 16, woke up to my dad screaming and crying, telling me to call 911. I went to find my mom dead on the floor. 12 years later, I still remember seeing her face cold and her lips blue as my dad just stood back watching, with 911 asking me to do mouth-to-mouth, knowing she was dead and blue. I do bird rescue, usually pigeons from my own home. I had watched 2 cars in front of me run over a pigeon that was just sitting on the road. She survived with barely any wounds, but she had an old infected leg wound. I cleaned her up, put her on an intense antibiotic course, spent my days with her, feeding and caring for her, and she healed, both physically and mentally. Cut to a few weeks later, I took photos for rehoming. She sat perfectly for them. I turned to put her back in her bed, and she coughed, a strange cough. Just as I was asking her if she was okay, she bled out all her blood in seconds through her beak. Aneurysm. She didn't even have time to register what was happening, but between the absolute primal scream that came out of my mouth and the fear in her eyes, It was by far the worst death for any creature. I won't forget it, ever. I wish she could have been given more time. I've never written this down. It's somehow therapeutic to revisit and remember her before it happened. Leaving Mumbai on the train, we passed through some desperately poor neighborhoods where locals used the tracks as a public toilet. I saw a sickly guy walk onto the side track, lift up his lungi, and a jet of green liquid shot out of his, but for what seemed like a minute straight. It was an enormous volume of liquid. I thought that guy is not well. I worked in nursing homes for most of my working career. Some residents come in having been horribly neglected. They come in with very deep skin ulcers. There was a man who was dying of cancer and had been left in the same position for too long. He developed a massive tunneling skin ulcer on his tailbone. You could see the spinal bones when you looked inside it. Even after my years as an EMT, I'd say it's a tie between my wife needing an emergency C-section with blood splattering on the floor and them taking me away to wait in another room, wondering if I'm about to become a single dad to our 4-year-old daughter, or when the same son who was delivered via that C-section stopped breathing in his rocker/sleeper, and I happened to look over and noticed he was gray and still. Luckily, I was able to get him breathing again with no apparent lasting effects. Everything worked out in the end, but wow, even now it's hard to comprehend those times. A corpse floating in the sea in really bad condition. The atmosphere matched the scene. Dark gray sky, cold temperature, no one on the beach, light wind. I'll always remember this scene, truly horrific. I was about 11 or 12 and went to visit NYC with my mom, stepdad, sister, and stepsister. We came out of the apartment we had been staying in to see a young guy who had recently jumped from his 7th floor balcony. He landed between 2 parked cars. His legs were bent in all the wrong directions, and unfortunately, he seemed to have survived the initial jump. He was on his back, coughing up and choking on his blood. The EMS had just arrived, and it seemed like they were taking their time walking the backboard over. But after thinking about it for the day, I realized that this is something they probably see daily and already know the outcome. I grew up in a post-Soviet country in the 90s. After the fall, most Eastern European countries became kind of post-apocalyptic. The government was corrupt and did nothing for its citizens. The police were just another organized crime syndicate. And then there were also organized crime syndicates. Oh, and McDonald's. So about a year or so before my parents decided that we should move to Germany, some guys thought it would be a great idea to rob a currency exchange place. Before the police did anything, as if they were going to, the owner's security and the robbers had a Hollywood-style car chase through the city, with the security shooting the robbers to death in front of our house. I was playing in the backyard and heard the commotion and the gunfire. I also went to the street to look at the bodies. I was about 10 to 11 years old, so that's the most NSFW thing I have ever seen. Dead guys in a beat-up BMW.